in China escalates. Beijing has now responded to a new U.S. tariff penalties announced last week by upping import duties on American products. The tit-for-tat measures come after the world's two largest economies failed to break the impasse during a recent round of trade talks. Let's get more on the story now and touch base with our correspondent in Beijing, Patrick Fok. Patrick, thank you very much indeed for your time. How might things play out now, Patrick, that negotiations between the two sides have broken down and both have gone back to rising tariffs on one another?
Well, look, in terms of the next step or the next phase of this trade war, if you like, is that the US will undergo the necessary procedures to impose further tariffs on another $300 billion worth of Chinese goods. That'll begin with a public hearing on June 17th, followed by a week of comments. So those tariffs, which will by then account for nearly all Chinese exports to the US, could kick in as early as June 24th. Whether these things well, people say whether they're going to take after that, but no doubt they are more than these tariff measures.
All right. All right, it seems that we're having an issue with that line. We're going to try to get that link back up and speak to Patrick with regards to this very, very important international story. And I was just reading from the timeline of Donald Trump about 15 hours ago, and he's heading out at China, saying that there will be nobody left in China to do business with. Very bad for China, very good for USA. But China has taken he says so advantage of the US for so many years that they are way ahead. In brackets, in parentheses, our president did not do the job. Therefore, China should not retaliate, will only get worse, exclamation mark. I understand Patrick is back with us from Beijing. Patrick, you were saying with regards to how things might play out, now that negotiations between the two sides have broken down.
Yeah, well, there is going to be a public hearing on June 17th about the next phase of tariffs on another $300 billion worth of Chinese goods. That'll be followed by a week of comments. So those tariffs, accounting by then for nearly all Chinese exports to the US, could kick in as early as June 24th. But as we've seen, this sort of escalation of punitive measures hasn't really gotten us anywhere so far. That date, June 24th, is significant. It comes just before the G20 meeting taking place in Osaka, Japan, and President Trump has said that he thinks that it'll take 3 to 4 weeks to see whether or not there will be any success in terms of a deal. No doubt he's referring to perhaps a meeting between himself and the Chinese leader, President Xi. That is expected to take place in Japan, very possibly, and one might hope that at the very least the US might refrain from slapping tariffs on another $300 billion worth of Chinese goods at that time, if the two leaders can come to terms in some sort of way.
So I guess the big question is, why is China so confident that it can weather the storm, so to speak?
Well, there's a big debate about who exactly is paying for the tariffs. And the truth is everybody does, whether you're suppliers or businesses or consumers from China or the US, everybody's suffering. There are plenty of businesses in China that are concerned about the impact on the goods that are being exported there. But China, certainly, as you say, is very confident of weathering the storm. Just last week, the central bank issued an article suggesting that growth would only be affected by 0.3%. That is probably less than what most analysts believe. A lot of people think that the Chinese economy will struggle to hit 6% GDP growth this year. But it's also said that the recent economic indicators have been fairly positive, and they think that it's quite manageable. Interestingly, both sides have kept the conversation, if you like, quite civilized so far. We heard Wang Yi yesterday say that both sides have got the wisdom to be able able to try and sort out this issue. So that is an indication that the two do still want to make a deal if that's possible. But certainly, as you say, China is very confident that if it does need to dig its heels in, that it can manage the situation.
Patrick, this all boils down to how this is going to affect the man or woman on the street, so to speak. How's this news being received on the ground?
Well, look, as I mentioned, there are plenty of businesses in China that are concerned, particularly about this latest round of tariffs. On the Chinese side, there are businesses that have very tight margins of less than 25%. They're concerned that that will erode profits entirely. But in general, the economy over the last year in China hasn't been faring particularly well. We are likely to see the Chinese government perhaps introduce more measures to try and stimulate growth. Of course, there's a lot of concern about falling into dangerous debt levels here, but businesses are quite simply trying to manage along the way. There's very little that businesses can do if the Chinese government has decided to take a certain policy with regards to trade. But both the US and the Chinese are quite certain about what they want out of it, and China has said repeatedly that it won't do anything that is not in its interest, no matter how the US asks.
Patrick Fok is keeping a close eye on the situation in China. Patrick, thank you.